I am 72 years old, and I have seen more darkness than most souls could bear. My name is Tawny Redford, though that second name was never truly mine. It belonged to the man who claimed ownership of my body, my labor, my very breath. Tonight, as I sit here with these trembling hands, I must tell you what happened in the summer of 1858, when the Mississippi heat hung thick as molasses and death walked closer to me than my own shadow. I had lived on the Redford plantation since I was 7 years old, brought there after my mama was sold away to a cotton farm in Alabama. I never saw her again. 55 years I gave to that land. 55 years of picking cotton until my fingers bled, of cooking meals I could never taste, of washing clothes while my own rags fell apart on my back. My body was bent like an old oak tree. My hair had gone white as cotton bolls, and my knees cracked with every step. But my mind stayed sharp as the blade they used to cut the cane. Master Edmund Redford was not the worst of them, people said. He did not whip as often as some. He allowed us a few hours of rest on Sundays. He did not separate all the families, though he had separated plenty. But evil wears many faces, and a soft-spoken devil is still a devil. His son, Master Thomas, had inherited the plantation 2 years prior when Edmund passed, and Thomas carried his father's cruelty with none of his restraint. That night in July, I could not sleep. The heat was suffocating in the small cabin I shared with 3 other women, Bee, who was near 40, and 2 younger girls, Lila and May, barely 20 between them. We slept on corn husk mattresses that offered no comfort, in a room with gaps in the walls that let in mosquitoes and snakes alike. I lay there, listening to the chorus of cicadas, feeling the weight of my years pressing down on my chest. Then I heard voices. They drifted through the thick night air from the direction of the big house. Male voices, low and conspiratorial. I recognized Master Thomas immediately. His voice carried that particular tone of privilege and poison. The other voice belonged to the overseer, Mr. Garrett, a man whose very presence made the air feel colder. Something in their tone made my blood run cold. I rose slowly, my joints protesting, and crept to the cabin door. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting silver light across the yard. I could see them standing near the barn, their faces illuminated by a lantern. "Before dawn," Master Thomas was saying, "the old woman has become useless. She can barely work, and I will not waste resources feeding dead weight." My heart stopped. I knew instantly they were speaking of me. "What would you have me do?" Mr. Garrett asked. "Make it look natural. An accident. She is old. No one will question it. Then bury her quickly before the others wake. I want it done cleanly." Mr. Garrett nodded, and I watched as Master Thomas handed him something that glinted in the moonlight. My mind raced. They were planning my murder, my burial. Before the sun even rose, they intended to erase me from this world as if I had never existed. I stumbled back into the cabin, my breath coming in short gasps. Bia stirred and looked at me with concerned eyes. "Tawny? What is it?" "They mean to kill me," I whispered. "Before morning." Bia sat up quickly, fear flashing across her face. "Who?" "Master Thomas and Mr. Garrett. I heard them planning it. They think I am too old, too useless." Lila and May woke then, and the 4 of us huddled together in the darkness. For a moment, we simply held each other, knowing that any one of us could face the same fate at any time. This was the reality we lived. Our lives held no value beyond what labor we could provide. "What will you do?" Bia asked, her voice trembling. I looked at these women, these souls who had become my family when everything else had been stripped away, and I felt something I had not felt in decades. Not fear, not resignation, but rage. Pure, burning rage. "I will not die tonight," I said quietly. "Not by his hand." "But how can you stop them?" May whispered. "They have all the power." "Power," I said, my mind beginning to work through a plan that seemed impossible and yet necessary, "is only what we allow others to have over us. I have lived 72 years on this earth. I have survived things that would break most people, and I will not let that man decide when my story ends." I moved to the small wooden chest that held my few possessions. A comb, a piece of cloth that had belonged to my mama, a small knife I used for cutting vegetables in the kitchen. I took the knife and tucked it into the waistband of my dress. "Tawny, what are you going to do?" Bee asked, fear and something like admiration mixing in her voice. "I am going to dig a grave," I said. "Just not mine." The moonlight streamed through the gaps in our cabin walls, illuminating the dust that hung in the air like spirits. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and strong despite my age. I had been enslaved for 65 years. I had endured unspeakable things. I had watched friends and family sold away, beaten, worked to death. I had swallowed my voice, my rage, my very humanity for decades. But tonight, something had shifted. Perhaps it was knowing that I had nothing left to lose. Perhaps it was the accumulation of all those years of injustice finally reaching a breaking point. Or perhaps it was simply that even the most beaten-down soul has a limit, a line that, once crossed, awakens something primal and unstoppable. I thought of my mama, sold away when I was just a child. I thought of my sister, who died at 15 from fever because no doctor would treat her. I thought of every person I had loved who had been crushed by this system of cruelty. And I thought of myself, Tawny, a woman with dreams and hopes and a mind as sharp as any, reduced to dead weight by a man who saw people as property. "Listen to me," I said, to the 3 women watching me with wide eyes. "Whatever happens tonight, you know nothing. You slept through everything. Do you understand?" They nodded, though tears streamed down May's young face. I embraced each of them, perhaps for the last time. Then I slipped out into the Mississippi night, into the silver moonlight, toward whatever fate awaited me. My body was old and tired, but my spirit burned with the fire of every ancestor who had resisted, who had fought, who had refused to accept that their lives meant nothing. The shovel leaned against the barn wall, exactly where I knew it would be. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my worn hands, and I began to walk toward the place where they would expect to find my grave. But tonight, I decided, the grave would belong to someone else. The shovel felt heavier than it should have, though I had wielded such tools for more years than I cared to count. My hands, gnarled and scarred from decades of labor, wrapped around the wooden handle with a familiarity that bordered on intimate. Every callus, every bent finger, every aching joint told the story of a life spent building someone else's wealth while my own body crumbled. I made my way past the rows of slave cabins, moving as quietly as my old bones would allow. The plantation was a small city unto itself, the big house gleaming white even in moonlight, the cotton fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon, the barn and outbuildings, the overseer's cottage, and our cabins arranged in neat rows like markers in a graveyard. Everything in its place, everything ordered and controlled, except tonight. I knew where they would expect to do it. There was a spot beyond the cotton storage shed, near the edge of the property, where the land dipped down toward a creek. It was secluded, hidden from view of the big house and the cabins. Bodies had been buried there before, people who had died from exhaustion, from punishment, from despair. No markers indicated their presence. They simply returned to the earth as if they had never walked upon it. The summer air hung thick and still, carrying the scent of magnolia and something darker, something that smelled like fear and iron. Sweat rolled down my back despite the hour. The cicadas had gone quiet, as if nature itself held its breath waiting to see what would unfold. I had perhaps 2 hours before dawn, maybe 3. Mr. Garrett would come for me then, expecting to find me asleep and vulnerable. He would likely bring something to ensure my silence, a cloth soaked in something, or perhaps he would simply use his hands. Either way, he expected an easy task, an old woman too weak to resist. That assumption would be his mistake. I reached the spot and set down the shovel. My plan was forming more clearly now, though it relied on timing, courage, and more luck than I had any right to expect. I would dig the grave, not deep, but deep enough to appear convincing in the pre-dawn darkness. I would position myself so that when Mr. Garrett arrived, I would have the advantage of surprise. And then I would do what I had to do. But first, I needed to think about what had brought me to this moment. I was born in 1786 in Virginia, to a woman named Sarah, who had been born free but was enslaved through trickery and false documents. She told me stories of her childhood, of walking freely through markets, of learning to read from a kind teacher, of dreams she had once held. Those stories were my inheritance, more valuable than gold. They reminded me that I was human, that my bondage was not natural or deserved, but imposed through violence and law. When I was 7, my mama was sold to settle a gambling debt. I remember her face as they loaded her into the wagon, the way she mouthed, "I love you," one last time. I screamed until my voice gave out. My sister Clara held me as I wept. 3 years later, Clara was gone too, taken by a fever that spread through the slave quarters like wildfire. The master's family received medical attention. We received nothing. I was 10 years old, alone, and enslaved. The years that followed blurred together in a haze of work and survival. I learned to make myself useful in the kitchen, which was better than the fields. I learned to anticipate the moods of the masters and mistresses, to make myself invisible when danger approached, to swallow words that would have gotten me killed. I learned that resistance took many forms, some large and dramatic, others small and invisible. I burned meals when the mistress was especially cruel. I broke tools accidentally when the work became unbearable. I sang songs that carried coded messages about escape routes and safe houses. I taught younger ones to read in secret, tracing letters in the dirt and erasing them quickly. These were dangerous acts, punishable by death or worse, but they kept my spirit alive when everything else tried to kill it. I had loved once. His name was Joseph, and he worked in the fields. We married in the way enslaved people could marry, with no legal recognition, but with our hearts fully committed. For 3 years, we carved out moments of joy in the midst of horror. He made me laugh. He held me when nightmares came. He whispered dreams of freedom that we both knew might never come true. Then Master Edmund sold him to a plantation in Georgia. No warning, no goodbye. One morning he was gone, and I never saw him again. I carried his child for 5 months before losing it to the stress and malnutrition. After that, I hardened something inside myself. I decided I would survive, but I would not hope. Hope was too dangerous, too painful. The decades passed. I watched children grow up enslaved. I watched young men and women broken by the weight of bondage. I watched the system perpetuate itself, generation after generation, as if this horror was simply the natural order of things. But it was not natural. It was chosen. Every day, people chose this cruelty. They chose to see us as property rather than people. They chose profit over humanity. And those choices, repeated across thousands of plantations and millions of lives, created an ocean of suffering so vast it defied comprehension. Now, at 72, I was deemed worthless. The irony did not escape me. I had given my entire life to building the Redford fortune. My labor had fed them, clothed them, maintained their comfort. And now that my body was failing, now that I had given everything I had to give, they wanted to dispose of me like a broken tool. I began to dig. The earth was hard, baked by the summer sun. Each thrust of the shovel sent pain shooting through my back and shoulders. My breath came in ragged gasps. But I dug with purpose, with fury, with the accumulated rage of 65 years of bondage. I thought of my mama as I dug. I thought of Clara and Joseph. I thought of every person I had watched suffer and die under this system. I thought of the children born into chains, who would know nothing else unless something changed. And I thought of Master Thomas, sleeping comfortably in his bed, having casually ordered my death as if it were nothing more significant than ordering dinner. The grave grew deeper. Sweat poured down my face, mixing with tears I did not bother to wipe away. My muscles screamed in protest, but I did not stop. This grave would serve a purpose, though not the one they intended. As I worked, I heard an owl call from somewhere in the darkness. It reminded me of stories my mama used to tell about spirits and ancestors watching over us. I did not know if I believed such things anymore, but if they were watching, I hoped they would understand what I was about to do. I hoped they would forgive me if it was wrong, and I hoped they would guide my hand if it was right. The hole was now about 4 feet deep and roughly 6 feet long. Deep enough. In the darkness, it would appear complete. I climbed out carefully, my old bones protesting every movement. I positioned the shovel nearby, within easy reach. Then I settled down beside the grave to wait. Dawn was still perhaps an hour away. The sky remained dark, though the moon had begun its descent toward the western horizon. Stars scattered across the black expanse above, indifferent to the drama unfolding below them. I thought about what I was planning to do, taking a life. Even the life of someone who had intended to take mine, who represented a system that had taken so many lives already. Was I justified? Would I be able to live with myself afterward? Then I thought about the alternative. Dying silently, buried in an unmarked grave, my death as invisible as my life, allowing them to erase me completely, as if I had never mattered, never felt, never loved, never suffered. Accepting, in those final moments, that they were right about me, that I was nothing but property to be discarded. No, whatever happened next, I would not accept that. I would not go quietly. I would not make their violence easy or comfortable. If this was how my story ended, then I would write the ending myself. I heard footsteps approaching through the darkness. My heart hammered in my chest, every muscle tensed. My hand found the small knife tucked in my dress, and I gripped it tightly. Mr. Garrett was coming, right on schedule, to murder an old woman in her sleep. But I was not asleep. I was not unprepared, and I was not the victim he expected to find. The footsteps grew louder, crunching on the dry grass and dirt. I could see his silhouette now, a tall figure moving with the confidence of someone who believed himself unopposed. Mr. Garrett carried something in his hands, a length of rope, I realized, and my stomach clenched. He had planned to strangle me then, quick and quiet, leaving no evidence of poison or violence that might raise questions. I pressed myself against the ground near the edge of the grave I had dug, making myself as small and invisible as possible. The darkness was my ally now. He would not expect to find me here, awake and aware. He would expect to walk to my cabin and find me sleeping. But then he stopped, noticing something that made him pause: the empty grave, the shovel lying nearby. His head turned, scanning the area with sudden wariness. "What in the hell?" he muttered, his voice carrying clearly through the still air. This was not how I had planned it. I had hoped to ambush him on his way to my cabin, but he had come here first to prepare the grave himself. Now he knew something was wrong. The element of surprise was slipping away. I had to make a choice in that moment: remain hidden and hope he left, or act now while I still had some advantage. Every second I hesitated was a second he might discover me or raise an alarm. I thought of my mama. I thought of Joseph. I thought of every person who had died unavenged, unmourned, erased. I stood up. "Looking for someone, Mr. Garrett?" My voice, rough with age but steady with purpose, cut through the darkness. He spun toward me, his face registering shock and confusion in the moonlight. "Tawny? What are you doing out here?" "I could ask you the same question," I said, taking a step toward him. "But we both know the answer, do not we? You came to kill me. Master Thomas sent you." His expression shifted from confusion to something harder, more dangerous. The rope tightened in his hands. "You should have stayed in your cabin, old woman. This could have been easy." "Easy," I repeated, and I laughed, a sound that surprised even me, bitter and sharp. 72 years I have lived, and not one day has been easy. Why should my death be any different? He moved toward me, his intentions clear. He was younger, stronger, and saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. But he had made the mistake of underestimating what desperation and rage could accomplish. As he reached for me, I moved faster than my old body should have allowed. Years of survival had taught me to act when necessary, to push past pain and fear when life demanded it. I ducked under his grasp and brought up the small knife I had been concealing, slashing across his reaching arm. He cried out in pain and surprise, stumbling backward. Blood darkened his sleeve. He looked at me with new eyes now, no longer an easy victim, but something he had not anticipated. A threat. "You slave witch," he snarled, rage contorting his features. "You will hang for this." "Will I?" I asked, circling slowly, keeping distance between us. "Or will I already be dead, buried in that grave you came to put me in? Who will believe that an old woman defended herself against a murderer?" He lunged again, and this time I was not fast enough. His hand caught my arm, squeezing with brutal force. The knife fell from my grip. He dragged me toward him, the rope rising in his other hand. I could see the intent in his eyes. He would finish this now and make sure I paid dearly for my resistance. But I had not survived 72 years by giving up easily. I drove my knee upward with all the force I could muster, connecting with his body in a way that made him gasp and double over. As he bent forward, I brought my elbow down hard on the back of his neck. He fell to one knee, and I scrambled for the shovel lying nearby. My hands closed around the wooden handle just as he rose again, murder written clearly on his face now. There was no more talk, no more hesitation. This was survival in its rawest form, him or me, and I had already decided it would not be me. He charged forward, and I swung the shovel with every ounce of strength left in my aged body. The metal blade connected with his skull with a sickening crack that I would hear in my dreams for whatever time I had left. He dropped like a stone, hitting the ground with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the night. For a long moment, I simply stood there, breathing hard, the shovel still gripped in my trembling hands. Then I dropped to my knees beside him, pressing my fingers to his neck to check for a pulse. Nothing. Mr. Garrett was dead. I had killed him. The reality of what I had done crashed over me like a wave. I had taken a life. Yes, he had intended to take mine. Yes, he represented a system built on violence and oppression. Yes, he had likely killed or caused the deaths of others before me. But still, I had killed him. My hands shook as I pulled them away from his body. I looked down at this man who had terrorized so many people, who had wielded power without mercy, who had come to murder an old woman in her sleep, and I felt, not joy, not satisfaction, but something more complex. Relief that I was alive, horror at what I had been forced to do, and a grim sense of justice that perhaps, just this once, the victim had struck back. But I could not dwell on these feelings. Dawn was coming, and with it would come discovery. I had to think clearly, had to plan my next moves carefully. The grave was already dug. That solved one problem. I bent down, grunting with effort, and began the arduous task of moving Mr. Garrett's body to the edge of the pit. He was a large man, easily twice my weight, and my aged body screamed in protest as I pushed and pulled and dragged him inch by inch. Sweat poured down my face. My back felt as though it might snap, but I kept working, driven by the knowledge that my life depended on finishing this task. Finally, with one last great shove, I rolled him into the grave. His body landed with a dull thump at the bottom of the pit. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, looking down at the man who had intended to bury me. "May God have mercy on your soul," I whispered, though I was not certain he deserved such mercy, because this world showed none to us. Then I began to fill in the grave. Each shovelful of dirt felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My muscles burned, my joints ached. I had to stop several times to rest, leaning on the shovel and gasping for air. But I kept going, driven by necessity and the approaching dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east by the time I finished. The grave was filled and roughly smoothed over. It would not hold up to close inspection in daylight, but in the dim pre-dawn light, it looked like nothing more than a patch of disturbed earth, exactly what one would expect from a freshly prepared burial plot. I took Mr. Garrett's rope and the bloodied knife and walked to the creek nearby. I washed the knife clean and buried it beneath a rock. The rope I weighted with stones and threw into the deepest part of the creek I could reach. Then I washed my own hands and face, trying to remove any evidence of the night's events. The sky was definitely lighter now. I had perhaps 30 minutes before people would begin stirring. I needed to return to my cabin before anyone noticed my absence. As I walked back through the awakening plantation, I felt as though I were moving through a dream. The familiar landscape looked strange now, transformed by what I had done. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I had defied the ultimate power they held over us, the power of life and death. And somehow, impossibly, I had survived. But survival, I knew, was only the first challenge. Now, I would have to live with what I had done and find a way to keep breathing in a world that would show no mercy if my actions were discovered. I slipped back into the cabin just as the first birds began their morning songs. Bia sat up immediately, her eyes wide with fear and questions. Lila and May stirred as well, both looking at me as though I were a ghost. "Tawny," Bia whispered urgently. "What happened? We have been terrified all night." I sank onto my corn husk mattress, every muscle in my body screaming. I felt ancient beyond my years, as though I had aged another decade in a single night. "It is done," I said quietly. "I am alive, and he is not." May's hand flew to her mouth. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Bea simply nodded slowly, understanding the weight of those simple words. "Where?" Bea asked. "The grave that was meant for me," I replied. "And that is all you need to know. If anyone asks, I slept here all night. You all slept through the night without incident. Do you understand?" They nodded, though fear was written plainly on their faces. They understood the danger, not just to me, but to all of us. If my actions were discovered, there would be consequences that extended far beyond my own life. The masters would need to make an example to remind every enslaved person what happened when they dared to resist. "Try to sleep a little more," I told them. "When the bell rings, we rise as we always do. Nothing is different. Nothing has changed." But everything had changed, and we all knew it. When the morning bell rang an hour later, we emerged from our cabin along with everyone else. The routine began as it always did, gathering for the distribution of cornmeal and salt pork, receiving our work assignments, heading to our various tasks. I was sent to the kitchen as usual to help prepare breakfast for the master's family. Master Thomas came down to the dining room as I was setting out the food. I kept my eyes lowered, my movements careful and subservient, exactly as I had done for decades. Every instinct I had developed over a lifetime of slavery kicked in. Make yourself small, invisible, unthreatening. "Has anyone seen Mr. Garrett this morning?" he asked the house servant, a young man named Isaac. "No, sir," Isaac replied. "He has not come for breakfast yet." Master Thomas frowned slightly but said nothing more. He ate his meal and departed to attend to business in the fields. I exhaled slowly, my heart still racing beneath my calm exterior. The morning progressed with agonizing slowness. Every moment I expected someone to discover the grave, to find Mr. Garrett's body, to raise the alarm. Every footstep made me tense. Every shout from outside made my heart leap into my throat. But the hours passed, and no alarm came. By midday, Master Thomas's concern had clearly grown. He sent people to search for Mr. Garrett, checking the overseer's cottage, the barn, the fields, asking everyone if they had seen him. The answer was always no. I continued my work in the kitchen, peeling potatoes with shaking hands, stirring pots that I could barely focus on. The cook, an older woman named Ruth, noticed my distraction. "You feeling poorly, Tawny?" she asked quietly. "Just tired," I replied. "Did not sleep well last night." Ruth nodded sympathetically. "These old bones do not rest easy, do they?" If she only knew. By evening, the plantation was buzzing with speculation. Where had Mr. Garrett gone? Had he abandoned his position? Had something happened to him? Master Thomas was clearly furious, pacing and shouting orders to search every building, every corner of the property. But no one thought to look in the freshly dug grave behind the cotton storage shed. Why would they? It was just a hole in the ground, prepared for a burial that had not yet happened. That night, back in our cabin, the four of us sat in tense silence. Finally, Bea spoke. "They will keep searching," she said quietly. "What if they find him?" "They will not," I replied, with more confidence than I felt. "Not unless someone tells them where to look." "We would never," May said quickly, and Lila nodded in agreement. "I know," I said gently. "But fear makes people do things they never thought they would do. If they start questioning us, if they threaten you, I want you to know. You may tell them the truth. I will not hold it against you." "No," Bea said firmly. "We are in this together, Tawny. What you did to survive. Any one of us would have done the same if we had your courage." Tears stung my eyes. After so many years of isolation, of hardening my heart against connection and loss, these women offered me something I thought I had lost forever. Solidarity, family, love. "Thank you," I whispered. The days that followed were perhaps the most terrifying of my life, and I had lived through horrors that most people could not imagine. Every morning I woke expecting to be discovered. Every evening I lay down uncertain if I would see another dawn. Master Thomas brought in the sheriff, a fat man with a red face who asked questions and looked around with an air of bored annoyance. Missing overseers were apparently not uncommon. Men took positions on plantations and then abandoned them for better opportunities, or fled debts, or simply disappeared into the vast American frontier. Most likely, he ran off, the sheriff told Master Thomas. These types are unreliable. He probably owed money somewhere and decided to make himself scarce. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Master Thomas was not satisfied, but what could he do? There was no evidence of foul play, no body, no witnesses to any crime. After a week of searching and questioning, life began to return to its normal rhythm. A new overseer was hired, a thin man named Mr. Collins, who seemed more interested in his account books than in terrorizing enslaved people. And still, no one discovered the grave. Weeks passed, then months. Summer faded into fall, and fall into winter. The cotton was harvested. The work continued as it always had, backbreaking and endless. But I was alive. Against all odds, impossibly, I had survived. I had survived not by accepting my fate, not by going quietly, but by fighting back, by refusing to let them erase me without consequence. Yet survival came with a price. I carried the weight of what I had done every moment of every day. When I closed my eyes at night, I saw Mr. Garrett's face. I heard the crack of the shovel against his skull. I felt the terror and fury that had driven me to kill another human being. Was I justified? Had I committed murder or self-defense? The law would say murder without question. Enslaved people had no right to defend themselves against white people, no matter the circumstances. We were property, and property could not claim self-defense. But the law was wrong. I knew this in my bones, in my soul. A law that said one person could own another, that said my life had no value beyond my labor, that said I should submit to my own murder without resistance. Such a law had no moral authority. I had done what I had to do to survive, and I would carry that burden for whatever time I had left, along with all the other burdens I had carried for 72 years. Winter in Mississippi was nothing like the brutal winters I had heard about in the North, but it brought its own hardships. The cabins were drafty and cold. Our thin clothes offered little protection. We still worked, though the nature of the work shifted, repairing tools and buildings, processing cotton, preparing for the next planting season. I continued in the kitchen, my hands permanently stained and scarred from decades of work. The new overseer, Mr. Collins, largely left us alone as long as the work got done. He was not kind. No overseer could be truly kind and still maintain the system. But he was not cruel in the way Mr. Garrett had been. Perhaps that was the best we could hope for. The grave behind the cotton storage shed remained undisturbed. Grass began to grow over it, slowly erasing the evidence of that terrible night. Sometimes I walked past it and felt a cold knot in my stomach. Sometimes I found myself standing there, looking down at the earth that covered Mr. Garrett's body, wondering if his spirit haunted this place. But mostly, I tried not to think about it. The other enslaved people on the plantation had their own theories about what had happened to Mr. Garrett. Some believed he had run off with money he had stolen. Others thought he might have been killed by someone from town, some debt collector or angry husband. A few whispered that he had gotten what he deserved, that the universe had a way of balancing accounts eventually. No one suspected the truth. Why would they? An old woman, barely able to work, overpowering a strong man in his prime? It was unthinkable. And that, I realized, was what had saved me. The very assumptions that made people like Master Thomas see me as disposable also made me invisible as a threat. Lila, May, and I grew closer during those months. We became more than cabin mates. We became sisters in the truest sense. They never spoke of that night to anyone, never gave any indication that they knew anything beyond what everyone else knew. But in the privacy of our cabin, we supported each other through the daily horrors of our lives. Bea had a son who had been sold away years ago. She spoke of him sometimes, wondering if he was alive, if he remembered her, if he had children of his own. Lila had lost her mother to a beating 2 years prior. May had been separated from her twin sister when they were teenagers and still cried for her in her sleep. Each of us carried grief that would have crushed us if we had to carry it alone. But together, we managed to keep breathing, keep moving, keep surviving. Spring came, and with it the planting season. Despite my age, I was still expected to help in the fields when the kitchen work was light. My back bent over the rows, my hands pushing seeds into the earth, the sun beating down without mercy. Every movement was agony, but I did not complain. Complaining earned you nothing but more suffering. One day in late April, as I worked in the garden behind the big house, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Master Thomas was speaking with a visitor, a man from Alabama who had come to discuss purchasing some of the enslaved people. They stood on the veranda, drinking lemonade and smoking cigars, while I weeded the flower beds below. I might be willing to part with a few of the younger ones, Master Thomas was saying. The older ones are barely worth feeding anymore. What about that old woman there? The visitor asked, and I knew without looking that he was pointing at me. Tawny? She has been here forever. Decent cook, I suppose, but she is ancient. You could not get much work out of her. I am not looking for work, the man said, and something in his tone made my skin crawl. I have a doctor friend who pays well for elderly subjects, research purposes. My stomach turned. I knew what he meant. There were doctors, particularly in the larger cities, who experimented on enslaved people. They used our bodies for medical research, testing procedures and theories without consent or anesthesia, because we were considered less than human. Interesting, Master Thomas said thoughtfully. How much would he pay? They discussed a price for my body, to be cut apart and studied while I was still alive or after they had killed me. They spoke about me the way one might discuss selling an old horse to a glue factory. Rage and terror warred inside me. I had survived Mr. Garrett. I had lived through the constant fear of discovery, and now this new threat emerged from an unexpected direction. That evening, I told Bea, Lila, and May what I had heard. You have to run, Bea said immediately. If they sell you to that man, you will suffer horrors worse than anything you have survived so far. Run? At my age? I would not make it 10 miles before they caught me. Then we fight, Lila said, her young face fierce. We will not let them take you. And how would we fight? I asked gently. 4 women against the entire plantation? Against the law? Against every armed white man who would help hunt us down? Silence fell over the cabin. We all knew the truth. There was no fighting this system directly. It was too big, too entrenched, too willing to use overwhelming violence to maintain itself. Then what will we do? May asked, tears in her voice. I thought about my mama, about Joseph, about every person I had loved and lost. I thought about the grave behind the cotton storage shed and the price I had paid to survive this long. And I thought about what kind of life I was surviving for. Endless work, constant fear, and now the prospect of being sold to be tortured in the name of science. I will find a way, I said finally. I always have. But the truth was, I did not know what way that might be. I was old, tired, and running out of options. The system that had enslaved me for 65 years was closing in again, finding new ways to extract value from my body even as it failed. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the plantation, the distant dogs barking, the wind through the trees, the breathing of my cabin mates, and I prayed for the first time in years. I did not know if God listened to the prayers of enslaved people, but I prayed anyway. I prayed for strength. I prayed for wisdom. I prayed for one more miracle, one more chance to survive, because I had not come this far, had not endured this much, only to give up now. 2 weeks after I overheard that conversation, Master Thomas informed me that I would be sold within the month. He did not tell me where or to whom, but I knew. The man from Alabama would return to collect his purchase, my body, to be used for whatever experiments his doctor friend had planned. I had 2 weeks to decide my fate. The options were limited and grim. I could accept my fate and face whatever horrors awaited me. I could try to run, though at 72 years old with a worn-out body, I would likely be caught within days. I could try to fight, though one old woman could not hope to overpower the forces arrayed against me. Or I could choose to end my own life on my own terms, denying them the satisfaction of using my body for their purposes. None of these options felt like a real choice. They were all just different flavors of defeat. But as I worked through those 2 weeks, moving through the familiar routines that had defined my life for so long, something began to shift in my thinking. I found myself remembering conversations I had heard over the years, whispers about the Underground Railroad, about abolitionists in the North, about free Black communities that existed despite every effort to crush them. I remembered a man named Daniel who had been sold away 3 years ago. Before he left, he had told me about a network of people who helped enslaved people escape. He had mentioned names, places, signs to look for. At the time, I had dismissed it as fantasy. Escape was for young, strong people, not for old women like me. But now, with nothing left to lose, I began to wonder if perhaps that fantasy might be my only hope. I sought out the oldest enslaved people on the plantation, those who had been there even longer than me. I asked careful questions, shared stories, listened for hints and clues. Slowly, piece by piece, I assembled information. There was a free Black family that lived about 15 miles north, near the Tennessee border. They were said to help people traveling north, though they had to be extremely careful. The penalties for assisting escaped slaves were severe: fines, imprisonment, even death. There was a church that served as a meeting point, identifiable by a specific symbol carved into the doorframe. There were safe houses, marked by quilts, hung in particular patterns. There was a whole hidden world that existed beneath the surface of the visible one, a network of resistance and hope. The problem, as always, was getting there. 15 miles might as well have been 1,500 for someone in my condition. Patrols watched the roads. Dogs tracked runaways. The entire system was designed to make escape nearly impossible. Unless, I realized, they were not looking for you. Mr. Garrett's disappearance had taught me something valuable. People could vanish, and if there was no obvious evidence of foul play, the investigation would eventually lose momentum. They assumed he had run off somewhere. Could I create a similar disappearance? An idea began to form, dangerous and desperate, but possibly workable. The cotton storage shed, where I had buried Mr. Garrett, caught fire one night a week before I was scheduled to be sold. It was an old building, full of dry wood and lint, and once the flames started, they spread quickly. The entire plantation woke to the sight of fire lighting up the night sky. In the chaos and confusion, as everyone rushed to form bucket lines and save what they could, I slipped away into the darkness. I had prepared a small bundle, a few pieces of food, a blanket, the clothes on my back. It was not much, but it was all I could carry. I knew they would search for me eventually, but with the fire providing a distraction, and with the assumption that I was simply an old woman who had probably gotten confused and wandered off in the chaos, I might have a few hours head start. I moved as quickly as my old body would allow, heading north by the stars. Every step was agony. My knees screamed. My back felt like it might snap. My breath came in ragged gasps. But I kept moving, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant capture, and capture meant horrors I could not allow myself to imagine. By dawn, I had covered perhaps 5 miles. It was not nearly enough, but I found a thick stand of trees and underbrush where I could hide for the day. I could not risk traveling in daylight. I would be too visible, too easy to spot. As I lay there in my hiding place, listening to the sounds of the waking world around me, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. 72 years of slavery, a lifetime of suffering, loss, and resistance. And now, this final desperate gamble for something I had long since stopped believing in: freedom. That night, I traveled another few miles, and the night after that, a few more. My body was failing. I could feel it shutting down, unable to sustain this effort. My feet were bloody and swollen. Hunger gnawed at my belly. Thirst made my tongue thick and my thoughts fuzzy. On the 4th night, I collapsed near a small creek, unable to go further. This was it, I thought. I had tried, but my body simply could not do what my spirit demanded. I would die here, alone in the woods, and perhaps that was still better than the alternative. But as I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, I heard voices, footsteps approaching. Fear jolted through me. They had found me. It was over. Then a gentle hand touched my shoulder. "Sister, can you hear me?" The voice was black, female, kind. I opened my eyes to see a woman's face looking down at me with concern. Behind her stood two men, also black, also free based on their clothing and bearing. "We saw your fire signal," the woman said. "You are safe now. We will take you the rest of the way." Fire signal? Then I understood. The burning of the cotton storage shed had been interpreted as a signal, a call for help. It had not been my intention, but Providence had worked in my favor. They carried me to a wagon hidden in the trees and covered me with blankets. As we began to move, the woman, whose name was Hannah, gave me water and spoke soothingly. "You are brave to have come this far at your age," she said. "Most people would have given up." "I have spent my whole life giving up," I replied weakly. "I wanted to try something different just once." It took 3 more weeks of dangerous travel, moving at night and hiding during the day, passing through a network of safe houses and sympathetic souls. My health declined steadily. The years of hard labor, combined with the stress of escape, were taking their final toll. But I made it. Against all odds, impossibly, I crossed into free territory. I lived for 6 more months in a small community of formerly enslaved people in Ohio. They took care of me, these strangers who became family. They listened to my stories. They honored my survival. And when I finally passed away peacefully in a real bed, surrounded by people who saw me as human, I died free. This is my story. I am Tawny Redford, and I was enslaved for 65 years. I survived things that should have broken me. I killed a man who tried to murder me. I escaped when escape seemed impossible. And I lived long enough to know freedom, even if only briefly. I tell you this story not because I am special or uniquely strong, but because I am not. There were millions like me, people who endured unimaginable suffering, who resisted in ways both large and small, who fought for their humanity even when the entire world tried to deny it. Remember us. Remember that we lived, loved, suffered, and resisted. Remember that slavery was not some distant historical abstraction, but a daily reality of violence, cruelty, and systematic dehumanization. And remember that even in the darkest circumstances, even when every option seems impossible, the human spirit can find a way to survive, to resist, and sometimes, against all odds, to be free. My name is Tawny Redford. I was born enslaved, but I died free. And that, after everything, is something. The end.